sometimes the biggest favor you can do is just to appear vulnerable to the people who are a little bit behind you, because they're all afraid. They all have that question that they're a bit embarrassed to ask. And if you make it okay for them to ask that question, that's like the best present you can give them.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into yet another episode of the Freedom Point. So glad you're here with us again today. Also really appreciate, those faithful listeners and followers that have been binging the last several months of episodes. We've had some tremendous guests on our show, and I have another amazing guest with me again today, Terrie Schauer. Terrie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm now going to have to live up to being an amazing guest. I'm going to do my absolute best.
Based upon the limited information that I know about you, you'll do just fine. So with that said, Terrie has over 20 years of experience as a real estate investor and property manager. Terrie is the co-founder of Equity Builders Club, a real estate coaching and consulting group based in Montreal. She's also the leading authority on applying mindfulness principles to real estate investing and has written the #1 best-selling book on the topic, Mindful Landlord. Terrie, I'm not really doing your bio much justice here. I know there's a lot more to say there. So would love for you to let our listening audience know a little bit more about Terrie, your journey, what you're focused on today, etc.
Sure. So, it's really funny because I find like those bios always read like a highlight reel. And I think the more interesting thing is like what's behind the highlight reel. And it all sounds super, intentional 20 years after the fact, but that's actually never how the journey takes place. So like really to kind of make a long story short, I started investing in real estate when I was 26. I'd done a bit of managing as a student before, and like after that, I kind of read Rich Dad Poor Dad and was like, okay, I want to now do this for profit for myself. So I went to see dad, borrowed a down payment, bought a triplex in the worst part of town, and then one building, two buildings, three buildings later. So for us up in Montreal, that's now 9 doors. But we'd exhausted our residential borrowing capacity. And I knew I wanted to continue in real estate, but like the investing door was kind of closed to me with the knowledge that I had at that time. And so instead, I built a management company. Like my management company is called My Room Management. So that tells you the degree to which I was operating really out of my basement in complete isolation. And so instead of, going and getting that network around me and being around other investors, I really just tried to go it my own and, ended up building a property management company. And so fast forward 10 years, still have 9 doors, have got a ton of management experience, have built a management company, but like my investing is stalled. And then in a weird way, through some like connection, like I'm also in Quebec's French language. And so the English community here is really small. And there was like somebody who was trying to launch an English coaching business who was looking for a property management coach. And so then we got connected, and all of a sudden I'm like coaching property management in like an investors group, but I have 9 doors. Sure, I've managed over 1,000, but like I didn't have the investor cred to be on that stage. And so then what happened is that all of a sudden I'm around these other investors and I'm like, oh, this is how you get into multifamily. And so I learned that. And like basically within, I guess like 3 years, like 10x the portfolio to where now I have about 80 doors, and started my own coaching company because, and I can't say coaching really, like it's a community that offers some education, but really what we're doing is offering people that surrounding that they need to go from being mom and pop like I was to being a professional full-time landlord. And so we have a community around that, but like that's really kind of, and if you look at my progression, it makes perfect sense why it would turn into that, because that's what I should have ended up there, at the beginning of my career, instead of building this property management company that like ultimately was not as interesting as having all those doors under control.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you've got, quite a decorated, background from being in the kind of single family space on the residential side with 9 doors. Obviously your experience on the property management side, of the business, being a commercial real estate, coach, right? To now scaling up to 80 doors, plus doing the coaching, as well as a side hustle or a main hustle, right, of yours. So would like for you to maybe go back into kind of the archives, the history, and talk to us a little bit more about your experience, building up and scaling up to 9 residential doors. What did that experience look like? What have you pivoted from that strategy, or have you doubled down on that strategy? What has that looked like for you?
Well, so I mean, those 9 doors happened within a period of like almost, a year and a half. Like it went really fast. And it was because at that time I like hacked this. I was house hacking before house hacking was a thing. And so like I said, I bought the first building in the worst part of town. My tenants left, and there I was faced with, now I'm going to have to rent to like the not great people who are on the market. And I had worked in student rentals before. So I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to furnish this with like, what's it called? Like Value Village, like Salvation Army stuff, because it was before bed bugs. So like, I was hauling mattresses on like the top of my Honda Civic and like furnished it on a shoestring and then doubled my rent. So by renting to foreign students, and I lived in the building. So like I really created like an awesome house hack, which was very cool for people who came from away. And then that turned into a community. And then I built, like, with the cash flow, I built equity. The market was going up. And then without really thinking too much, I was suddenly owned 3 buildings, because like dad was willing to keep co signing the mortgage because each time we just refi. And since it was worth more, we'd pull a bit out and do another one. And then after that, like I bumped up against that, that with residential borrowing, you are limited. In my case, I was a student, right? So like I'm limited by dad's borrowing capacity, and then we're tapped out and we can't go any further. And so then what that is, and then like the property management business after that. So I built it to a house hack, and at like the high point of that model I was running like 60 rooms. So it was like almost like a student residence, yeah, spread over different buildings in this crappy area. And then I kind of grew out of that. Like I saw that if I wanted to scale any further, I'd have to do like normal property management. And like I also aged out of it. I was 26 when I started. It was fun to party with people. Then by the time I was like in my mid 30s, I'm like, I'm done, cleaning up the mess, and so hit on so and so's girlfriend and they're having a fist fight and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm just like, I'm done. And then I went through this kind of like professionalization phase where I started taking on like more like normal yearly long term rental management. And then I got in touch with the investors and then started buying multifamily, sold my initial 3 triplexes and turned that into, 80 doors now. So in multifamily.
It's a remarkable run and track record that you've had in the space. I To be honest with you, I would say most that listen to our podcast are not uber familiar with the property management side of a real estate business. Most people's perception of the property management team would be they're a dime a dozen, right? They're all going to provide the same level or degree of support of the tenant base, or oversight if it's a value add renovation play, right? So maybe can you talk to us a little bit more about kind of how important is it that you have the right property management team, whether it's third party or in house? How incredibly important that property management entity and that group of individuals are in the successful management of a property over the course of the investment hold period.
Yeah. So it's absolutely integral. And like, so my company still manages all my holdings that are in Montreal. So I have built out my own team, and I do invest in a submarket that's about 2 hours away. And I have a property manager there who's boots on the ground. And, I went through one iteration where like I have a 20-year experience as property manager, but I hired the wrong guy first. And I hired the wrong guy and gave him too much leash, you know? And so what that looks like in practice is, he had his own like software. He took the keys, he had the leases. I had nothing. And so like it turned out that he'd been like cashing rent and we didn't even know like who'd paid, who hadn't paid. One tenant, it turned out, hadn't paid in 2 months, but he was still like transferring me the money. And then eventually it like changed. And so we had no record of anything. And then I realized, okay, I got to part ways with this guy because it's like not working. And then he wouldn't give me my leases. He wouldn't give me the keys. I had no active tenant information. So like I basically had to go door knocking and then hire another property manager who went to then go get the keys cut and like clean up the whole mess. So like and like I'm a professional. I've been doing this myself and I still got kind of taken in. So like after that, actually one of the things I teach is like how to manage the manager. And what I've come up with at the end of it is that to the extent that you can have a hybrid model where you control the data. So what that looks like on our end is we have all the leases in our Google Drive, and when a new PM comes on, we just share the Google Drive with them. But under no circumstances are they the ones controlling the documents. I have a property management software and the manager gets a login, but it's my software. So that if I ever have to dump him, well, I still have all of the history of who paid in the payment platform. I have everybody's phone numbers. I have all the data. And like if you're doing that, all you're doing is like it's like you're firing a concierge sort of. And like I know that in the US there are certain states who like don't allow you to work that way. Like each state has their own kind of rules as to what powers you need to delegate to the property manager, what you don't. But for me, when I was coming to recruiting, like part of my question was, look, this is the hybrid model we're working on. You want the deal or you don't want it. And because I was, growing, I guess, like it's also easier to pitch when you're in a position of strength to say, like, look, I have a higher volume. And if you want my business, you need to play by my rules. So that worked with the person that I ended up hiring. But like to the extent people can negotiate that kind of deal with a property manager, like I highly recommend it. And, you know, just to sort of get into the weeds a little bit more, like property management is my business model. Some people renovate, some people build, people do all different sorts of stuff. But like, if you are a talented property manager, you don't need to spend any money on renovation. You don't need to do anything. You just need to become good at spotting poorly managed properties and taking them up a notch. And like that's all I do, and it's a great business strategy. So for people who kind of like are like, "Oh, I don't want to dirty my hands with that." Like actually you can make a lot of money dirtying your hands with that. You don't even have to get that dirty. You just sit in your office and make phone calls.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. I would like to get your kind of take on something, and that is, oftentimes when I'm evaluating deploying my own capital into deals, whether or not the main operator is vertically integrated on the property management side or use third party, sometimes helps me at least feel more comfortable with one investment over the other. Where I know the main operator, for example, is able to control, large to a large extent, the management of that property over the course of that hold period, if in fact those employees are in house versus third party. So I'd love to maybe get your kind of perspective on, how you approach that, as an investor, are third party property management companies versus in-house property management, which one's typically better, what are some red flags maybe that investors should be on the lookout for?
Well, I mean, I think, intuitively, you've kind of said exactly what I would say, which is that like I do joint ventures in Canada, things are a little bit different. Like, in the US, you guys jump very quickly to syndications. For us, the syndication process is super complicated because of our, financial rules. And so, like that, it looks like 80K of government fees. And so, what we typically do is we set up joint ventures where you're basically creating like a holding company that owns the building and then you each own shares in that and it becomes a joint venture, but it's not this like it's not a syndication per se. So like in addition to my own personal investments, that I run that. And so like part of the reason why I think I'm in no shortage of people who want to work with me is because of that vertical integration. And it just means that like there's no black box. Like if you want to know exactly, you want to FaceTime the person who's renting your unit, like I'll get them on the phone. You want to see what's happening with our accounting, I will give you a login. Like I have that power as the operator to be able to like really show you everything you want to see. It's an open book. And I have such certainty in how the sausage is made that when I'm pitching, it makes it very easy. And so I think ultimately we're coming at it from two different ends, but we're saying the same thing. Now, if I take the business model that I run in the submarket, like it's how involved the operator is in that property management process. And so, like, ultimately, when I have to hire a PM, I'm still controlling the data. So if I have to fire that person, I'm still I feel like I have my hands enough in the dough that I'm going to be able to take it over and have little casualty. And I think like definitely if you can't work with an operator who's completely vertically integrated, somebody who has this kind of hybrid model, like I think that should raise your confidence level if you are one of those passive investors who's looking for someone who you want to work with. So
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
I would like to take this time to maybe highlight a book that you recently published called The Mindful Landlord. I know that it emphasizes kind of this mindfulness in property management. For those that choose to purchase your book, what might be a few of the different, key takeaways that the reader should expect to receive, as a result of reading your book?
yeah, for sure. So, I mean, like, look, the book is basically like it's one chapter is mindfulness, one chapter is property management or real estate investing. And so, like, property management is typically a place where people get a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anxiety. So there are like, how-to points in there about how to set up your systems in a way that are going to support really your lifestyle. Because that's ultimately what it is. Like, if you do own property, the last thing you want it to do is to ruin every family dinner from now until next Christmas. And so the way to do that is to set it up so that it supports your lifestyle as opposed to take away from it. But like ultimately the mindfulness piece, which we didn't talk about up until now, but I had I don't know if I want to say a day job or a side hustle as a martial artist for a long time. And I still train, but at one point I was competing pretty seriously. I have two world championships in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and, the success that I've had in martial arts, it really comes with like a life philosophy, which is mindfulness. And when you're in that situation where, you performance and potential bodily risk, and you have to overcome fear and make sure that you're able to perform your best, unless you're like super mentally aligned and you really understand how your consciousness operates, you're not going to be successful at it. And if I can give like your audience, a mindfulness takeaway, when I talk about how mindfulness operates, how your consciousness operates, it's not mindset. Like the real estate world is full of people with their affirmations and their 4 a.m. morning routine. It's not that. It's understanding that your consciousness basically has three levels. So you have your thoughts, which are like the radio, they're always playing, can't turn them off, but you don't have to identify with them. Then you have your emotions, which are, I like to compare them to like the dashboard lights. So, like, my fear dashboard light can go off, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to do anything about it. Right. Like, my husband's a mechanic. And like, when his car, I joke that it's a Christmas tree. Like, his dashboard lights are always on all the time. Whereas, like, I get one little light and I'm like panicking. I need to pull over. And he's like, no, no, Terry, you can just keep driving it. Like, it's fine. Let me check it 200 kilometers from now. Right. So like those dashboard lights of your emotions are there to tell you something, but they're not you. They're just a system that's going off and you can choose how you relate to it. And so, in real estate commonly this is fear. Because if we want to grow, whether it's you buy the first property, you buy the first multifamily, you do your first private loan, whatever it is, every time you take a growth step it's going to be scary. And you have to develop a relationship with that fear if you intend to grow, and a way to understand what it's doing for you, because it's designed to protect you, but you can't let it box you in. So we have the thoughts, we have the emotions, and then underneath that, we have this thing called presence, or the watcher. And this is what like all the hokey meditation people are going on about, of like be in the now, be present. The whole exercise of mindfulness is to come to identify with that operation of your mind as opposed to the thoughts and the emotions. The thoughts are the calculator, the emotions are the dashboard lights, but I am the watcher. And that means that I get to decide which one of those things I'm tuning into. And I don't become a slave to my thoughts. I'm not a slave to my emotions. I am that presence that's underneath it. And so, like, the book explains that and then gives you a bit of a method of how you can maximize that, how you can implement that and use it, because it's a crazy tool. Like, once you really understand how your consciousness works, it's a crazy tool. It's just most of us don't even use it. We just walk around thinking and feeling and acting, but we're not running that, we're not driving that car, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably operating your life in a very unintentional way with a lack of clarity, right? And so I definitely appreciate, your breakdown of mindfulness, thoughts, emotions, presence, right? I think about, non-professional related types of roles, people in their own personal lives, right? Can really, bring to life, some of these attributes in their own, personal relationships with others as well. Kind of speaking of, mindfulness, I know that you advocate that real estate investing is about freedom rather than money. I know that that can kind of qualify as that, mindset shift, mindset change, mindfulness, right? Can you elaborate on that perspective and how it shapes your coaching methods?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like if you think of the reasons that anybody gets into real estate, me, you, anybody, right? Like, it's a vehicle for wealth generation. And whether you're looking at it as generational wealth, so something that will be here after you're gone, okay, now all of a sudden we're in relationship with our mortality, right? Like, that's a very profound thing. Or else you want to, my podcast is called the Real Escape Investing Podcast. What are we escaping from? The constraints of finance, geography, time, all of these things that if we don't control our wealth, we don't have that freedom. Like, maybe you owe your 9 to 5 to a boss. Maybe you're not building anything. That's the worst thing. It's like you're selling those hours. Not only don't you control your time, but you're also not building anything that you're going to have when you're done working. Whereas the hours that you put into your real estate investing, you get to keep that. And that's where we get into that whole, generational wealth thing. And so I think intuitively, a lot of us know that that's why we got into real estate investing in the first place, even if it's not articulated. But then the issue becomes that once we, get into it, then it becomes about what I call the 3Ds: deals, doors, and dollars. Then it becomes like the bank account Olympics, and we're trying to do better than the next person, or we're trying to make this next thing, and like ultimately that's not where the meaning is. Like, wealth is a tool that you use to enable other things. And so, like, the more you're able to integrate mindfulness, the more this awareness is just with you all the time. And if I tell you how I go through my day, like, as a property manager, like, all kinds of stuff goes wrong, right? And so, like, I'm just like, look, it doesn't matter ultimately. Like, it's not existential, it's not affecting the bottom line. I'm like more concerned about what's going to happen when my son gets home from school than like what is this particular business problem. Like, that's not why I got into it in the first place.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that breakdown. And really, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, I think you highlight it well in your podcast that uses this word escape, right? I think there's so many people, that are busy and almost feel stuck in their careers because they have a hard time figuring out, how is it that I'm able to get off of this hamster wheel? How am I able to escape the dependence upon a paycheck? How can I stop trading more and more time for more and more money, even though the cost of living continues to increase? Inflation keeps eating away, at our nest eggs, right? So I really appreciate that. But I'd also like to now maybe have you kind of give, some more perspective on, your encouraging your coaching clients to increased deal flow, increased doors, which ultimately increases dollars, right? Your 3Ds. What are some common misconceptions that you work through with new investors as you're having these conversations?
Mhm. Well, I think the first one you just touched on, which is really that, people typically come into my ecosystem and like they know something's not working for them. And so the first step is really cognitively to get them to recognize that like, yeah, you're feeling trapped by your job, you're feeling trapped by your current financial situation. That's a constraining feeling. And so the first thing is to understand, like, no, you need to break out of that. And there are particular ways that you can do that. Real estate is one way. And whether it's a condo or a multifamily, like it's going to get you to the same place, just at a somewhat different speed. So I think the first thing is really that is to see things for what they are. Like everybody knows passive income, but I don't think people really fully appreciate, just how bad it is in a sense to you're not just selling your time, like you're actually selling your time to build someone else's asset, right? Like at the end of it, whoever owns that company is going to walk away with the rewards of your work. And like even if you're not making a single dollar more than you would in your salary, just the fact that you get to keep the thing you're working on is already a huge thing. So I think the first thing is just like a cognitive reframing. And then typically people have to get through all of these like I don't want to say mental bad habits, but this conditioning that our system has layered upon them, which is this like false feeling of security that you have when you have a paycheck, and to understand that like combat the fear of signing those big mortgages and of networking and doing these stretch goals in the financial arena, like you have to get them kind of motivated and revved up to be able to face some of those demons, right? And so like there's that kind of like cognitive boosting thing. But then in terms of like really the nuts and bolts of how you do it, I mean, my program is quite local to Canada, to Quebec, and it's really learning the multifamily game because it's different. I think in the US, you guys can scale a residential portfolio a lot further than we can because you have debt service loans that are available on that. If they're investments, we don't. So it means that if you're in residential, you're going to be stuck with your own debt ratios forever, and nobody can own more than 3 properties, maybe 4 if like you're a cardiac surgeon, but like you're not growing an empire that way. And so for here, people need to learn how to get into that multifamily game. And how do you do that? It's with partnerships, understanding the financing, and like raising capital. So it's to understand how those things fit together.
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense to me. I suspect that a large part of it is also on the execution side of that. And in order to properly execute, on the blueprint or the playbook or the coaching that you provide, the individual needs to be willing to put in the reps, right? And the individual needs to be willing to push forward even when they fail. They fail forward, right? And it's through those reps that obviously we can learn, how to succeed in that path of really the path being working to fulfill your own dreams versus fulfilling the dreams of someone else, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And so, like, just, I will say one more kind of thing about our coaching program, if you can call it that. But like, there's an education aspect to it. So people come in and they get like, access to master classes, and we have group coaching calls and stuff. But like, beyond that, we put them in accountability pods so that they're meeting with a group of other people every single week. And they all have a, Q1, Q2, Q3 goals. And every week they got to show up and pass the embarrassment test of, did I do what I said I was going to do this week? So there's the accountability aspect, and then there's also this like network and community aspect. And my decision to have a very local coaching thing, like a lot of people are like, you can't make that much money that way, like you're not going to be nationwide. No, but we're in person, and we're in person about twice a month, and it means that people are able to build those connections and have those surroundings. And like, if I lock you in a dark closet and tell you, oh, just have faith and don't be scared, like good luck with that. Whereas like if you're surrounded every at every turn with people who are doing the same thing, have done the same thing, you're meeting them, you're meeting the people who helped them do it. So we really like make sure that we're surrounding them in this community. And it's like, I want to say, yeah, they have to put in the reps, but they have to try pretty hard to fail. Because if you show up, all you have to do is show up.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're exactly right. I mean, sometimes you just need to, like you said, show up, and sometimes you just need to open your mouth too, and be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to just stick your neck out there and not be uber concerned with what other people think. I hate to get morbid on you, but I remember somebody once telling me that the greatest regret that people have on their deathbed is they cared too much about what other people think, right? And so once you can have that type of perspective and know that sometimes, like you said, you just need to show up. Sometimes you just need to open up your mouth and be willing to be your authentic, genuine self. And people will be attracted, by that authenticity alone, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think, I will say also, part of the reason that led to me founding my own coaching thing as opposed to teaching for someone else was exactly that vulnerability piece. Because what grated on me is that a lot of the other organizations, when I would attend, or even when I ended up speaking for them, is a lot of the people who are in the front of the room, like, are really, it's coming from an ego place and it's coming from a monolithic success place. And like, it's, they say the manager sets the tone, but I think the coach sets the tone. And if, like, my goal is to like, I'm not perfect. Okay, I'm in a certain position now, but I struggled. And like, the extent to which the people at the front of the room are vulnerable, that allows everybody else to be it. But if you're there projecting strength, and maybe now I'm speaking to, the listeners of yours who are further along on the journey, sometimes the biggest favor you can do is just to appear vulnerable to the people who are a little bit behind you, because they're all afraid. They all have that question that they're a bit embarrassed to ask. And if you make it okay for them to ask that question, that's like the best present you can give them.
Yeah, Terry, this has been a remarkable conversation. I would love to hear just from a global perspective. I know you don't have a crystal ball. I don't either, but I know that real estate has seen its fair share of black swan events and headwinds, over the last couple of decades. Kind of in your perspective, you know, where is the real estate investment landscape evolving? Where do you think we go from here? That sort of thing.
hmm Well, I mean, as we're having this conversation, I just lost my government 3 days ago. I'm up in Canada. Currently have no government. Our prime minister resigned, and he's closed parliament. So, like, we're rudderless, leaderless for the next 2 months. Um, so, it's at the risk of trying to say something too broad to have it not be relevant, because the major difference between our markets is the regulation of debt. And historically, the US has been so much more volatile just because your debt markets are not as regulated as ours are. And so when you talk about these black swan events, I feel like it's embedded within an American context because you expect a certain amount of volatility. Like, our real estate market, historically, it's a little bit more, I want to say, like, a European economy, where, like, yeah, prices in France go up and down, prices in Canada go up and down, but like, we only have 5 banks and they're controlled by the government. And so, the chances that Canada goes through a 2008 event, we didn't have 2008. So, if I had to pronounce myself on where do I think the US real estate world is going, I think you might be better to ask an American that question. If you're asking me for like a macro, global thing, definitely right now the US dollar is up. Canadian real estate, we just, our central bank has started lowering our interest rates. So our market's doing actually better than yours is right now, I believe. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's not a great answer, but it's the best I can do.
Hey, it's a great answer, and we'll take what you can give us. So I appreciate that. This has been a remarkable conversation. Again, really appreciate you joining. The podcast today. What might be one or two different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, I'm on social media, Terrie Schauer. You can find me on any of the platforms. If you want to check out equitybuildersclub.com, you can check out the website. That's got all our information about coaching, although perhaps a bit less relevant if you're looking at investing in the US. My book is available on Amazon, and that is really written at a macro enough level that, an American audience, I think, can really get something from it, because those principles of property management and the principles of mindfulness are really universal.
That's great. That's great. Well, we will put those links in the show notes for the episode. Again, Terrie, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And listening audience, thank you again for joining another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.